Hello and welcome to Freedom from Fear, a German New Medicine podcast. I'm your host, Ashlee Newberry.
And I'm your other host, Abigail Puccioni. Please be aware that nothing discussed here on this podcast should be taken as medical advice.
Consult your trusted professionals and your own inner knowing before making any health decisions.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Freedom from Fear. This is episode 18, and today we're going to be diving into the topic of weight loss, or rather difficulty losing weight and when you have unwanted weight gain. And I want to start this off by saying, big caveat here. We are not talking about those who struggle with difficulty losing weight due to simply like overeating or under exercising. What we're talking about here with the biological programs that are running is going to be when you have difficulty losing weight despite doing all the so-called right things, getting enough sleep, getting decent exercise, moving your body an adequate amount, eating, a decent whole foods-based diet. We're not talking about perfection here, but, if there are two people and they're both about the same, build and frame and whatnot, and one has a lot of difficulty with unwanted weight gain or difficulty losing weight, and the other doesn't, despite exercising or moving their bodies about the same amount and getting pretty much the same number of, calories, like intake, that sort of thing, then when that's accounted for, and when you do have that basic, kind of foundation and nutrition and exercise, but you're still having difficulty losing weight, that's where these biological programs are going to come into play. So I just want to throw that out there, because I think that a common misconception in GNM can be that we're saying that what you eat doesn't matter at all, that you can just eat like unlimited, whatever you want, and you can just lay on the couch all day and never move your body, and that you can just be totally, fine and healthy. Like, no, like you have to have at least a basic, let's say baseline of adequate sleep, nutrition, moving your body. But when you're doing, like pretty good, doing all the so-called right things, living a normal, healthy lifestyle, and you're still struggling to lose weight, this is where the biological programs would come into play, which of course would be initiated by a biological conflict shock. So in our last episode, episode 17, which definitely go back and check that out if you have not already, we covered the KCT program in depth, and this stands for the Kidney Collecting Tubules program. And this program is the one where we deal with the symptom of water retention. And this is the most common program that we see in clients who are struggling with a difficulty to lose weight. So we will not be covering that program today simply because we already did an entire episode on that. And so today we're going to be looking at some of the less common programs. I don't want to say less common because these are common programs, but some of the less likely culprits of that difficulty losing weight. But we still see these quite a bit. And for a lot of people, they likely have KCT running. That's maybe the primary culprit. But then they also have some of these other programs that even if they resolve the KCT, they still might have some of that, stubborn weight loss or difficulty losing weight due to one or more of these programs running. So Ashlee, take it away. Let's dive into our first SBS that can be another, I'll say, culprit in difficulty losing weight.
Yeah, awesome. Yes. So first off, like Abigail said, KCT is usually the main one to look at, and you can have KCT running with any of these, or you could have multiple of these programs. So the first one that we're going to talk about is the fat tissue. So I know that almost every single one of my clients that I've ever worked with, and including myself, have some form of self-devaluation. And with the fat tissue, this is called a light self-devaluation. So meaning it's not like super deep, which would be the bones. So this would be, or a mild self-devaluation conflict. And the specifics of this conflict is that it's in a specific area of your body that you feel unattractive. So, and for most women, this can be seen as cellulite. So on the thighs, on the hips, on the butt, maybe the belly. And that is where then you have excess fatty tissue because your body is trying to help you with that, essentially not feeling good enough in that area, right? And it's that adaptation is trying to help you with that conflict. And so then what we end up with is this dimpled kind of look, in that area of the body. And so that can also become another track or another way that this cycle gets replicated, because then, because of the way it looks, then you feel more unattractive in that area of the body. So be paying attention to what is the story you're telling yourself about how certain parts of your body look or feel, or comparing yourself. um, I know with the lovely social media access that we most of us have, there's a lot of filters or a lot of people that are only showing certain aspects of their body, or in a posed form or good lighting, when like maybe when they're just walking around, that's not what their body actually looks like. So just be paying attention to that story. And then also, it's not about size like at all. So if you're a woman listening to this podcast and you have cellulite, or if you're a man listening and you have cellulite, um, like, again, paying attention to the stories, because it's a lot more common. I don't know like the exact numbers, but it's more common for women to have cellulite. And my personal opinion is that women have a lot higher beauty standards, especially like visually or aesthetically, than men do. And there's a lot more pressure societally and in our families and just like generationally to look a certain way, right? To show up, to like how you're presenting yourself matters more. Not that it actually matters more, but we've been taught that it matters more, than it does for men. And so again, it's not about the size of the person, that is why this program is running, but it's more about what are you telling yourself about certain aspects of your body. So for me personally, this has been one that I'm still working through. I have some in the belly area, and then I also have, it's been downgraded, but I still have an active KCT program going. And so, and that shows up, in the belly as well. And usually the fluid from the KCT program goes to where you have adaptations. So if you have self-devaluation in a certain area, or you have another conflict, the water is going to go where you have the adaptation already. So notice if you have an active KCT, like where is the water being stored? Where are you holding on to that water? Because that's going to be indicative of then probably where you have other programs going. And yeah, so the stories, right? What are we telling ourselves about our bodies? And I know for me, I've downgraded the cellulite program, but it's still there. And there's been a lot of stories about how I was supposed to look, especially growing up with my family. Most of the people in my family have larger larger butts, and there was always a story about that, like, and for me, like, I sometimes got unwanted attention because of that. And so it made me really self-conscious. And so it's like, well, of course I've run this program, because then my brain and my psyche and my body is trying to help me by, oh, well, I need to be more attractive in that area, right? Like, oh, I'm not good enough in that area. And then when your body's trying to help you, then you kind of have the opposite effect, because then the cellulite can get worse. And also with the KCT, so like I just said before, you can have both, but the KCT only without having this program going, like especially in the belly, would be just swollen and like firm skin, not necessarily like dimply like it would if you had the self-evaluation program running. But like I said, you could have both going at the same time. But the quality of how the skin and fat like looks in that area is going to be slightly different if you only have KCT versus if you have both going. Yeah, so Abigail, I'd love to hear your share about how size doesn't doesn't matter with this program.
Yeah. And also, I think we forgot to mention this, but this is a new mesoderm program, just for those wondering. And so, with new mesodermal programs, with the pattern of adaptation that we have going on here, we have cell breakdown, cell ulceration, or cell loss in the conflict active, and then cell replenishment in the healing phase. So, just wanted to
Yeah.
put that out there and clarify. But yeah, my personal experience with cellulite. So, I grew up doing ballet and I got really serious, really into it around the age of like 12, 13, I would say. And I remember um, being in classes and our teachers would always tell us to like tuck our tailbones. Like that was the most common phrase you'd hear is like tuck your tailbone, tuck your tailbone. So you're constantly trying to like suck in your stomach really hard to like make your butt tilt under. And so essentially the goal was to have like a flat butt, and they would even come and like try to like basically touch your butt and kind of like smack it to get it like make it straighter, make it straighter. It was, because in ballet, it's all about the lines and the aesthetics of it, right? And so you wanted to look like literally like a pre-puberty like little girl. Like that was the
Mhm.
aesthetic. Like to have no boobs and no butt was like
Mhm.
ideal. And so I was very small up top, which was great for ballet. But then there was a lot of self-devaluation because I had more of a butt and more hips and more like thighs, bigger thighs. And so I remember, oh my gosh, so many different potential conflict opportunities for things that my teachers would say or things that I would even just pick up on, right? Because
Mhm.
you got the point. Like the point was made by the people that they would pick in the castings and like then what I was seeing in magazines and with professional ballet dancers like and in the companies that were the best companies in the world, they looked like pre-puberty girls, right? Like they had like no boobs and like no butt. That was the look that you strove for. So of course it was very important that when you were, doing ballet, that you would really try to like tuck your butt under to make it as flat as possible. And I remember one very specific moment where I remember thinking, I really wish I could just shave off my butt, like literally just cut it off. Like that was what I wanted so bad. And of course now like it's considered like attractive to have a butt and whatever. But at that time, when I was a teenager and really into ballet, I cared way more about ballet than like how regular culture, regular society, like the beauty standards of regular society, right? I cared way more about what my, ballet teachers thought, the artistic directors, the company directors, like potential jobs as a ballerina, right? So anyway, I had so much self-evaluation to where I actually wanted to like cut off my butt. So you can see what was going on in my psyche. And I swear, ever since I was in high school, I have had or I've struggled with cellulite in my particularly my butt and thighs. I know exactly where it came from and how it started from, middle school, high school days with ballet. And yeah, another instance that I remember, a specific instance, was when I was applying for different summer intensives, which is a big thing in the ballet world, like what summer intensives you get accepted into, like that's a big thing. And of course, my goal, I really loved New York City Ballet and School of American Ballet, which is the school that's attached to New York City Ballet. It's one of the best programs in the world. And I always, of course, really like that was the goal. And I remember one of my ballet teachers specifically telling me, she said, "Oh, your legs are too fat to ever get in there. Like your legs are too chunky, basically." And or like your legs are too thick and she wasn't really trying to say I was fat. She was just trying to say like and I've always been a little like just the way I'm built, I have more substance to my lower body than I do my upper body. And, I think I've always had a lot of self-evaluation about that being unproportional in that way, like just aesthetically. But anyway, she was trying to say that like my lower half was just too chunky to like, like she was just trying to say like the way that you're built. And she was actually right. Like the way that I'm built, I would have never gotten accepted into that program or that company, which it seems very harsh. And that is exactly how, that's the standards of the ballet world. But yeah, I remember having a huge conflict shock moment at that. And again, it wasn't about like beauty necessarily. It was about I won't be able to get into the company I want to get into. I won't be accepted, right? I won't get to pursue my dream because of the way I look. So that definitely was a self-evaluation in terms of that. And I mean, I have a lot of other self-evaluation conflicts, like even a history with osteoporosis from a young age. So of course that could have landed as a more severe self-evaluation, but certainly also have the light self-evaluation with the cellulite there. So yeah.
Yeah. So interesting to think about all of this stuff and how powerful we are, right? That like our experience and how we interpret things. And this is not to say that it's your fault that you have cellulite
Right.
or any symptom that you may
Sure.
be having, but that the ways that we are set up for these conflicts, especially as women, is just interesting, right? And so if you're listening and you have children, like how can you change that story for them so that they are less likely to have these conflict shock moments and to be more accepting of how they are and who they are instead of trying to change them into someone that you want them to be or someone that you think they should be or how they should behave or how they should look or all of this stuff. Like it's just we are so powerful as individuals and then especially as parents, with just shifting the story of what symptoms mean and how you respond to your kids is really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now let's jump into the second adaptation that we'll be discussing today, which is the liver adaptation, specifically the liver parenchyma adaptation, which is related to a starvation conflict. And a starvation conflict can come from either a real or perceived lack of food. And sometimes this can also be from money, since we associate money with being able to obtain what we need to survive, obviously, including food. And I often find that early childhood starvation conflicts can lead to a loss of feeling full or feeling satiated over time. So, again, when this program is running in a hanging healing, so this is a chronic conflict that's been going on for a long time, this can definitely lead to issues with essentially your hunger cues. Okay. So, an example of this in say from childhood, and there's actually research to back this up, that children who experience actual hunger, that go through childhood hunger and not having adequate access to food, are actually way more likely to be overweight later on in life. So that's a pretty obvious connection there. But I also see this with children who have been put on strict diets or, were chronically on different strict diets, perhaps due to other health issues and, the parents or the doctors or whatever, or in the holistic realm, they thought that it would be good for the child to be on a strict diet for some reason or other. And again, this is not to shame, parents who maybe have put their child on a strict diet for whatever reason, but the result of that in the psyche, like the child could experience that as a starvation conflict. like that food is unsafe to eat, and I
Yeah.
don't know, like, what are the okay foods, what are the good foods versus the bad foods. I don't know what to eat. Like, and it can still, even if they actually have enough access to adequate food and calorie intake, there can still be that perceptual starvation conflict when they feel restricted in some way. So you'll also see this with even, older, like say in high school or college or even older, with people who are chronically dieting and on strict diets. It will become common that they can kind of lose the ability to access those natural hunger cues over time. So what that would be telling us is that there's likely a chronic, and of course, there's some other possibilities that we'll get to in a moment, but it could definitely be a starvation conflict in a hanging healing, in which over time that adaptation would lead to an inability to feel full or properly satiated. Anyway, I hope that yeah, is a helpful explanation. Ashlee, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I guess just again going back to like perception, and we're gonna do a future episode on food and
Mhm.
what does German new medicine say about food specifically, but like in general, the message we're trying to get across in this episode and all of our episodes is that there isn't one right way
Yeah.
to do any of this, or there's no like one right diet. Like, and so again, be paying attention to what is your relationship to food, and how have you been taught that these types of foods are toxic or
Mm.
bad for you, or good versus bad, right? That there's literally like that's all in our psyche's perception. And again, we're not saying that just eating junk all the time is going to be like the best thing for you, but it's about your relationship to the food rather than the food itself. Like if you had been starving in the desert, right? You hadn't had food or water for many days in a row, or let's say even weeks. And someone brings you McDonald's, right? Like you are not going to give an F about you're just going to about what's in the food, right? You're just going to devour it because you're so hungry. Like it's not you're not going to care about all of those things. Not saying that on a general daily basis that those things are not important, but that's not the end all to trying to avoid these conflict shocks, because it's not about the actual food. It's again, it's about your relationship to it.
Yeah.
So
And this is, again, from either a real physical lack of food or a perceived lack of food. So, exactly what Ashlee was saying. And, this is an endodermal program. And so, this is controlled by the brainstem. And so, when we are dealing with brainstem SBSs, brainstem programs, these are our most primal, most primitive programs that have to do with basic needs for survival. And so, in the case, think about a few hundred years ago, we really wouldn't have been thinking about diets or, oh, like what food's good or bad, or I need to go on a diet to lose weight. Like that really wouldn't have been so much in the collective consciousness, I'm assuming, right? It would be about not starving, not going
Mhm.
through a literal famine. Like I think people would have found the concept of dieting a bit strange. So again,
Yeah.
from our very primal brainstem controlled part of the brain, any restriction is going or could potentially be perceived by the psyche as a starvation conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. So moving on into the third SBS, which is also controlled from the brainstem and is also from the endoderm, embryonic germ layer, is the thyroid. So this conflict is all about morsels, which many of the brainstem programs are about morsels, different kinds of morsels. And the specific conflict for difficulty losing weight is the flavor of being too slow to catch the morsel. Um, and so this could look like not being fast enough to like get the promotion, right, at work, or being too slow, like you're not far enough in life, let's say. Especially for me, I grew up in religion, and oh well, if you're not married and have 2.5 kids by age 25, you're like too slow, right? So that morsel could look like a lot of different things. And it's not usually about food. In our modern days, it's more about these other morsels, like money, jobs, finances, relationships, like feeling like too slow or not far enough on the path in life, whatever that means to you specifically, or like what you've been kind of primed for in your growing up, in your personal history, like again, religion, family, like all of these things can contribute to this type of conflict. And so during the conflict active phase, you're going to have cell growth with this program. And then once you resolve it, the cells that you no longer need get broken down by bacteria. And so when you're in a hanging healing, so you keep activating this conflict over and over and over, this can result in thyroid insufficiency. So those thyroid hormones that you have that keep everything regulated, you're not going to have enough of. So it's going to slow down your metabolism. You're going to have lower energy, maybe being more tired. And this is going to actually lead to the weight gain. So it's not necessarily, this is a bit more indirect, because affecting your metabolism is going to lead to the weight gain, which is kind of like the end result of this conflict. So again, like I've keep sharing about in this episode and in general with any teaching with GNM, like paying attention to what is the story you're telling yourself about, in this case for this conflict, like being far enough along in life, or trying to get that morsel, right? Trying to catch that morsel, whatever that looks like for you. And right, have you been diagnosed with some type of thyroid symptom, or thyroid dis-ease, or hyperthyroidism or hypothyroidism, which in this case would be hypothyroidism. And so be paying attention to that. And also, like we said before, right, you can have multiple conflicts running. And with the brainstem, again, like Abigail was just saying about the liver conflict, some of these can be real morsels, right? Or they can be perceived morsels that you're trying to catch, that you're too slow to catch. So if you have a story that you're too slow in some way, you may have this program running. And actually, I have a really interesting story, a personal story to share. So I used to go on these insane backpacking trips with my family. We've gone to the Smoky Mountains, in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, Colorado, Arizona, Utah, like multiple day trips. I think the longest we ever did was like 10 days, hiking like between 10 to 14 miles a day, and just very physically hard. And so, and I haven't been diagnosed with any specific thyroid things, but I noticed that there was always this story about being too slow, right? About like, I would normally be at the back of my family, at the back of the group, plus I'm like the shortest in my family. So keeping up was challenging. And I'm carrying a lot of weight on my back, in my backpack. And but I remember this was the Smoky Mountains, we were in Tennessee, and the maps were very inaccurate for where we were hiking, like they just hadn't been updated. And we continued hiking, and everyone else sat down, took their packs off. And I was like, I know if I stop, like I'm not going to get going very well. So I just kept going, right? And I was like, you know what? It's better for me to be at the front of the pack, or to like not be feeling like the whole time that I'm too slow. I was like, I know for my own psyche, and this is before I knew German new medicine, but I was like, I know that for me, if I just keep going, this is going to be way better for me than stopping and trying to keep up with everyone else, right?
Yeah.
And so I just kept going. I was like, I'm just going to keep going. And finally, we ended up finding the campsite. And it was like many more miles than what the map had said. And we were all just dead tired. Um, and so I share this example because, right, paying attention to what is that story you're telling yourself. And then practically, like, what are other ways that you can help yourself? So in this case, even before learning German new medicine, I knew that for myself to not feel like I was too slow or feel like I'm falling behind, that if I'm at the front of the group, I'm going to do better and I'm going to be able to keep going a lot easier than if I'm at the back of the pack and feeling like, oh, I'm falling behind, I'm too slow. Because I know that that was my story. I know, as I remember, especially that trip is very vivid. So even if you don't necessarily have this diagnosis, be paying attention to that story of being too slow or falling behind, or like you need to quote catch up in some way, because that could definitely prime you for this type of conflict if you don't already have it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And just as a reminder for people who are like, what the heck's a morsel? A morsel can be literally anything. Okay. A morsel can be, usually we're talking about a thing here. We're not really talking about a person, although it can be a relationship, right? The morsel, the thing that you feel behind, say if you are single and you want a relationship and you feel like all your friends are in relationships and having babies and gain promotions in their careers or whatever, like perhaps, yeah, you could perceive a relationship as a morsel. That's the thing that you want. Again, this doesn't have to be a physical, literal thing. This can definitely
Yes.
be like a metaphorical thing or an abstract thing. So again, I like the verbiage of feeling behind, like what Ashlee described in her example, of, yeah, feeling like you're falling behind, like you're at the not the bottom of the pack, but at
The
the
back of the
back of the
pack.
pack. Yeah, the back of the pack, right? And so
Of course,
I
I had to
just
make it
thought,
rhyme.
yeah, to make it rhyme, of course. So I just thought of an example too of what a really common track might be for people that are experiencing this specific thyroid adaptation, which would lead to hypothyroidism. And this, of course, the conflict is being too slow to catch the morsel and feeling behind. So, again, like Ashlee said, in a hanging healing, this can result in the thyroid insufficiency. And so, an example of a hanging healing would be a situation in which this conflict is getting chronically reactivated for you. And for that to happen, you would be stepping on what we call a track. And if you need a refresher on what is a hanging healing and what are tracks, go check out episode 8, where we do a deep dive into that topic. So, anyway, a common track for this program might look like scrolling on social media, scrolling
Mm.
Instagram, scrolling Facebook, because guess what? A lot of people do when they're scrolling through their social media and they're seeing all the other people in their life that are of course posting the highlight reel, right? Or, maybe popular public figures or people who are very successful, or I don't know, different people that they, look up to or admire, or even just friends or family in their life. And they're looking at, oh, they just had their third kid and I don't have any kids yet. And I'm not even in a relationship and I would like to be in a relationship, but I'm falling behind, right? Like look at everyone else succeeding in life and they're all passing me up and I'm
Yep.
still living at home in my parents' basement. Like that's kind of the vibe with this conflict, is feeling like you're behind in life, or that specifically too slow to catch the morsel. But I think a very realistic example in today's world might very well be where social media, scrolling Instagram could be a track, or, looking at Facebook updates. Oh, so and so just got engaged. So and so's having a baby. They just got a job promotion. Oh, look at them. They're working in their dream career. And I'm still, working like a minimum wage starter job, So I think that these very real life situations where, through family, you can imagine family asking you like, oh, when are you going to get married? When are you going to get a girlfriend? When are you going to have a kid? When are you going to, all the questions, right? That could definitely be a track too. Or even just societal or cultural pressures, like what Ashlee was saying in the culture in which she was raised. If you weren't married and had one or two kids by age 25, then you were kind of behind. And so I think that that's a really good thing to keep in mind is how has my perception been primed to feel behind in life? Why do I feel like I'm not where I want to be? What pressures might I be putting on myself that I'm always behind? Oh, not fast enough, not good enough, not fast enough to catch the morsel. So yeah, hopefully that's a helpful maybe example also. But now we can move into our next adaptation, which is a blood sugar adaptation. And the SBS, the program here is going to be the alpha islet cells of the pancreas. Is that pronounced islet or islet? I think it's islet.
I think it's islet. I should know this from nursing school,
okay.
but you know.
I'm going to pronounce it alpha islet cells of the pancreas. Okay. So the underlying conflict with this one is a fear disgust conflict. So before I move on further, Ashlee, do you want to jump in and describe the nuance of conflict here, what we mean when we say fear disgust? I also have kind of a fun example of this.
Yeah. So this conflict it's an interesting one because usually this has some just like the conflict is called, there's some mix of fear and disgust or like repulsion kind of mixed in together. So it's not just one or the other, it's like both flavors combined in this recipe for this conflict, to just really use kitchen words. So this could be something like unwanted sexual practices where maybe you feel afraid, but you're also repulsed by what happened. This could also be something involving like bodily fluids. So something like with blood or urine or like poop. I'm sure this type of thing. I used to work in a hospital, and so, but I've never been really grossed out by any of that stuff. Like it's never really bothered me. Um, but this could come up in a situation like, let's say, when I worked as a nurse, that I'm dealing with a patient, right? That then all of a sudden has this huge bleed, right? And there's blood everywhere. And so it's like I'm in that moment, for sake of this example, like it's scary because maybe I don't know what's going on with the patient, or I'm like afraid for their health and well-being. But then also it's kind of gross because then there's like this bodily fluid everywhere, whether it's blood or something else. And so you can see how those types of situations could be a conflict shock moment for someone, especially if they have an aversion to these types of things, and then they're put in environments where they're dealing with these things a lot. This could also be being frightened of a drunk family member because there's a fear, right? Especially if you're a child, of maybe this person being unpredictable. But then maybe also like their smell and like just their general like maybe uncleanliness when this person is drunk, right? Could be the disgust part or like the repulsion part. And so again, those two combined create this conflict. And again, another example, we've been talking a lot about food on this podcast. could be for children, like having to eat disgusting food,
Yeah.
right? And I know that this came up for me a lot as a child, where we had to finish everything on our plate, right? Even if it's something you didn't like that was the rule. And even if, right, you thought it was gross, like I was, a little bit afraid of the consequences of, okay, what if I don't finish the food on my plate, right? So, and again, for children, they don't have the logic to be able to understand that like these rules are not about them,
Mhm.
that it's more about like the parents and how they're trying to parent in the best way that they are. And so that's a very common one for kids, or even going to a restaurant and having to try new foods. This happened to me when I was in Boston when I was like 10, and my grandpa like forced me to try an oyster against my will. And it was just so slimy and so gross. And I like oysters now, surprisingly. But that was definitely a conflict shock moment for me. I don't know if it was necessarily this one, but that would be an example of
Mhm.
this conflict where there's consequences if you're not listening to the adults or the parents, but yet you're repulsed by the food or disgusted by it. And so, again, how are we setting ourselves up and our kids for letting them make their own decisions instead of trying to highly encourage or force them to eat something that they're really not into? um,
I know
yeah.
that a common example too would be spiders. A lot of people have a fear of spiders, but they're also gross, like ew. And an example from when I was a kid, and I actually, as a child, dealt with hypoglycemia on a pretty regular basis. I would have moments where my blood sugar would, drop,
Mm.
and this was nothing severe, okay, but I definitely had this program running to a certain degree. And so anyway, I remember walking out of the house onto our patio, and there was a snake that was in the process of eating a frog. Like it literally
Ugh.
had the head of the frog in its mouth, and the frog's butt was, sticking out of the snake's mouth. And I saw it, and it was a total conflict shock moment. I mean, I was like immediately shaking. I started screaming. I think I was like shaking uncontrollably for at least an hour or two after that happened. I was just screaming, crying, screaming, crying. I mean, I was so horrified and afraid. I mean, I've always had a bit of a fear of snakes, and I guess I still do. But I was so scared by seeing a snake there on our porch, while also being equally disgusted
Mm.
by the snake in the process of eating the frog, nature. Um, and so that was really a huge conflict for me. That would definitely be an example. And of course, I don't know if this is exactly what initiated that program for me. And I know that I don't deal with that adaptation anymore. So I must have naturally resolved that over the course of time when I was a kid. But I can definitely see that being a really good example of this type of SBS, of that fear, disgust conflict. So I'm glad that we kind of touched on what that was, because a lot of people might read fear, disgust, conflict like, okay, great, what does that mean? So
Yeah.
hopefully you understand it a little better. That's why we like to give some kind of examples. But this can lead to basically a constant hunger when you're in the conflict active phase. And so what happens is that so this is an ectodermal program. And with this specific type of ectodermal program, we don't actually have the cell loss and then cell replenishment that's happening. What we actually have is a functional loss, and then in the healing phase, a functional restoration. So in this case, there would be a functional loss or functional impairment of the alpha isolate cells. And this leads to, well, I guess I said that, reduced functioning of the alpha isolate cells. And then that leads to what we know as hypoglycemia. And then that leads to a ravenous appetite. That's what,
Yeah.
would cause that kind of ravenous appetite, because your body can't regulate the blood sugar. So that's what's happening with this program. And so then that can, if you're always hungry, that can lead you to have an increased intake of food, of course, in order to compensate for the low blood sugar. Okay, so finally, we're going to wrap up by discussing the adrenal cortex adaptation. So this is a new mesoderm program in which we have cell loss and conflict active, and then cell replenishment in the healing phase. So this type of conflict is a wrong path conflict, or feeling like you've made the wrong decision. And so Dr. Hammer also described this as like betting on the wrong horse. And so this is when you feel like you're heading down the wrong path in your life, or that you have made the wrong decision at some point in the present or in the past. So this adaptation and a hanging healing would lead to an increased cortisol production, which causes adrenal hyperfunction. So again, this is when you have this conflict relapsing, or you're stepping on tracks on a recurring basis, which leads to this being a chronic symptom of that adrenal hyperfunction. So the symptoms with this program are going to be similar to long-term cortisone intake. So basically, the excess cortisol from the healing phase, the increase in cortisone production, is going to lead to this insulin resistance. And then that's what will lead to the weight gain. So basically, this causes an inability to regulate blood sugar, as we know, with insulin resistance. And so this is kind of similar to the blood sugar adaptation. It's just this affects the blood sugar in an indirect way, as opposed to the actual blood sugar adaptation, which would affect it more directly. But it's just important to note that the adrenal cortex adaptation can play a role in unwanted weight gain or difficulty losing weight through that excess cortisol that would lead to insulin resistance. So that's also a possibility. So now I guess we'll kind of wrap up this episode, because we covered all of the different SBSs that we set out to cover. And yeah, Ashlee, want to add any final notes?
So we just wanted to go over some practical tips on, okay, you're having a hard time losing weight, or, and you're eating well, you're exercising, and you're still having this weight loss resistance. And so, in order to figure out which program is causing this weight loss resistance, you need to know the programs very well and understand more in totality what the other symptoms are that also go along with these programs. Because on this episode, we're just covering weight gain or inability to lose weight. And so this is where the detective work comes in, and working with a practitioner can be really supportive and helpful to kind of shortcut this process of trying to figure out what is going on and which programs are running. And so, we offer coaching services, both Abigail and I, that we can help you work through these things to help you get to the point where you can resolve it, and then the weight will just hopefully fall off, and just to work on that with someone can be really supportive, because it can be hard to figure out what's going on when you're in it, right? So both of our websites and Instagram handles are linked in the show notes, and reach out to us if you would like to learn more and work with us. We would love the opportunity to do that, and to support you in working through these programs.
Yeah. And just as a side note, like, resolution is not always quick and easy. This can be a journey, a process. And what Ashlee and I do with our coaching services is we simply help educate you from a GNM perspective, so that you can understand the conflicts that are applicable to you, the programs that you're running, and what are the underlying conflicts that are the culprit or culprits of this difficulty losing weight. So that's truly the first step before you can start to work on those underlying conflicts and move towards resolution, or even just downgrading. It's first necessary to figure out, okay, what is actually going on here?
Yeah.
What programs am I running? Because I see a lot of people that, they might struggle with difficulty losing weight and they just, assume that it's one of the programs when that might not actually be the program that they're running. So they're essentially trying to work on the wrong underlying conflict. And
Mhm.
so it can just, and of course, you can continue listening to our podcast. There are multiple online resources to learn GNM that are, free or low cost. That's certainly an option. You can, dive in and educate yourself. But working with someone who is grounded in the GNM paradigm and can help teach you from the GNM perspective, it's essentially a shortcut. It can help you figure out a whole lot faster what's going on in your body and most importantly in your psyche, what's running the show here
Mhm.
and causing the adaptations. So yeah, that's where it can be really supportive to also just get an outside perspective, to have someone that can pick up on different things that you're saying and point things out to you and say things in a way that might make a light bulb go off and might, kind of have, or cause you to have an aha moment and realize something that, might start to shift your perception. So that's where the work that we do, that's where it comes in. So yeah, we hope you guys enjoyed this episode.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. We appreciate you being here.
If you would like some additional support in navigating your health symptoms, we both provide coaching services from a German New Medicine perspective.
Our Instagram handles and personal websites are linked in the podcast description.